The church was heavy with grief, the air thick with the scent of burning incense and wilted flowers. The slow hum of a sorrowful hymn floated through the room, voices trembling, breaking, as if the weight of the moment was too much to bear. At the altar, the priest spoke of the afterlife, of paradise, of a place where souls found rest. But no one was really listening. Their eyes were fixed on the wood in front of them. Akosua lay there, wrapped in white, her face peaceful in a way that felt cruel. Amma sat in the front row, her hands trembling in her lap. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her chest rising and falling as if she were drowning in a sea of sorrow. Her eyes, red and swollen, never left the wood. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just sat there, silence gripping the fabric of her dress. Then, suddenly, she stood up. A few people turned to look. She didn't say a word, just walked out. At first, people assumed she needed air, that the pain had been too much and she needed to breathe, to escape the suffocating atmosphere inside the church. A few aunties clucked their tongues, shaking their heads in pity. But then Amma returned, and this time she wasn't empty handed. In one hand, she clutched a baby bottle, the liquid inside sloshing as she walked. But what made the room fall into stunned silence was the state of her dress. It was disheveled, loose, rushed. Everyone knew. Everyone understood where the milk had come from. A hush swept through the church, a thick, horrified silence as Amma moved quickly, almost frantically toward the wood. Then she ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Others gasped as she reached the wood, her hands shaking as she tried to put the bottle between Akosua's parted lips. "Drink, please, 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 drink!" Her voice was raw, cracked, desperate. Sobs shook her entire body. "You have to come back. You have to." The entire congregation was frozen. Some turned away. Others whispered frantically. The choir stopped mid-hymn, voices trailing off into a stunned silence. A woman covered her child's eyes. The pallbearers were the first to move. Two of them rushed forward, grabbing Amma under the arms, trying to pull her away. "No, no, no, leave me. Let me feed her. She's hungry," she screamed, kicking at them, fighting their grip. One of them hissed, "What do you think you are doing?" Another, shaking his head, murmured, "You have to leave. You are disturbing the service." But Amma only fought harder. Her cries pierced the silence, raw and painful. Her legs buckled beneath her body convulsing with grief as the men dragged her back, away from Akosua. Her fingers clawed at the air, reaching for the wood, for the love she had lost, for the one thing she could never get back. And as they pulled her through the church doors, her voice echoed through the walls, through the others, through the stunned silence that followed. "She's still hungry." Amma barely remembered how she got home. The ride back was a blur. Streets passing by, voices merging into an unrecognizable hum. The weight of her grief pressing so heavily on her chest that she could hardly breathe. The moment she stepped inside, she let her body collapse onto the bed, her face buried deep into the sheets. And then, like a dam breaking, the sobs ripped through her. Deep, gut-wrenching cries, the kind that felt like they came from somewhere far beyond her control. Her body shook violently, her breath coming in ragged grabs, her mind replaying the last few hours over and over. Akosua's face, the bottle in her shaking hands, the horrified looks, the men dragging her out of the church like a mad woman. She's still hungry. Amma covered her ears as if trying to block out the memory, but it wouldn't go away. Then the baby's cries cut through the room. She lifted her head slightly, just in time to see Quabena walk in, cradling their 7-month-old son in his arms. The child's wails filled the space, loud and desperate. Quabena looked exhausted. His shirt was slightly crumpled, his forehead sleek with sweat. His eyes, full of worry, met hers. "Amma," he said, his voice soft but strained. "Please, I know it's hard, but it's not just you. It's not easy for me either. Or the baby." Amma stared at him, at the baby's tear-streaked face, at Kwabena's helplessness. Then anger bloomed inside her. "Is it not also your baby?" she snapped, pushing herself up. "I was gone for what? 4 hours, and you couldn't even keep the house together?" Kwabena's jaw tightened. He exhaled sharply, trying to choose his words carefully. "Amma, that's not what I..." She scoffed, laughed bitterly. "Useless," she muttered under her breath. Then, without another word, she grabbed her car keys from the bedside table and stormed out. Kwabena watched as the door slammed shut behind her, the baby still crying in his arms. Amma barely felt the steering wheel beneath her hands. The night air was thick, warm, pressing against her skin as she drove with no clear direction. Or maybe she had one. Maybe she had always known where she would end up. Her mind was a storm, grief twisting around anger, anger calling into exhaustion. She was too tired to cry anymore, too tired to think. The moment she pulled into the Legon Botanical Gardens, her chest tightened. It had been years since she came here alone. She stepped out of the car and let the silence swallow her whole. The trees swayed gently, whispering secrets only the wind would understand. The soft croaks of distant frogs, the chirps of crickets, the rustling of leaves, all sounds that had once been their lullaby. She walked forward, toward their bench, the one near the pond, shaded by the towering boab tree. She ran her fingers along the wooden armrest, feeling the grooves in the wood, the familiar scratch where Akosua had once carved A plus A with her house key. A sad smile touched Amma's lips. She could still hear Akosua's voice, still see the way she laughed, head tilted back, eyes shining in the moonlight, still feel the warmth of her palm against her own. She closed her eyes, and just like that, she was back in time. It had been a day much like this, a warm evening, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and flowers. Amma had come here alone, fresh out of a long, exhausting day at university. She wasn't the type to befriend strangers easily. She was quiet, kept to herself, didn't see the point of unnecessary conversations. But that day, as she sat on the bench, staring at the water, she had heard a voice. "You look like someone who thinks too much." She turned sharply, startled. A young woman stood beside the bench, her arms folded across her chest. She had dark brown skin, sharp cheekbones, and thick black braids that tumbled down her back. She was dressed simply, a fitted black top and jeans, but there was something about her, an energy, a pull. Amma blinked. "Excuse me?" The girl smiled, stepping closer. "You've been staring at that pond for the last 15 minutes. Either you are lost in deep thoughts or the frogs are giving you life advice." Amma snorted before she could stop herself. That was how it started. A simple, random conversation. Amma didn't know what possessed her that evening, but she stayed and talked. They spoke about school and about how exhausting it was to pretend you had your life together. By the time the sky darkened, they had exchanged numbers. And that night, Amma couldn't stop checking her phone. "Are you sleeping?" Amma had blinked at her phone, the screen glowing with Akosua's name at 11:42 p.m. "Not anymore." "Good. Keep me company." It became their ritual. Late night calls that stretched into 2 a.m., conversations about life, dreams, and childhood fears. Akosua made Amma laugh in ways no one else could. She made Amma talk, truly talk, in ways she never had before. She made Amma feel seen. And then the visit started. Come over, Akosua had texted one evening. Why? Because I made jollof and I don't want to share with anyone but you. Amma rolled her eyes at her phone, blushing hard. One night, as the rain drummed steadily against the roof, Amma and Akosua sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of blankets and the fading glow of the television. They had just finished watching Love and Basketball, their laughter and sighs still hanging in the air like the scent of popcorn and cocoa. Outside, the rain refused to let up, the soft patter blending with the low hum of the ending credits. Amma's mother stretched as she got up. All right, let's get you home, Akosua, she said, reaching for her car keys. Akosua shifted, half reluctant to leave the cozy space they had created. But as soon as they stepped outside and her mother turned the ignition, the car gave nothing but a tired sputter before falling silent. Amma raised an eyebrow. Well, that's unfortunate. Her mother sighed, trying again, but the car refused to cooperate. She glanced back at Akosua. You might have to call your parents, dear. Akosua nodded and pulled out her phone. Amma sat beside her, arms wrapped around herself as she listened to the muffled conversation. Then Akosua smiled, turning to Amma with a small triumphant glint in her eyes. They said I can stay the night. Amma hoped her expression didn't betray the way her stomach did an unfamiliar little flip. Well, I guess that settles it. Back in Amma's room, the air felt warmer, thicker with something unspoken. The two of them sat on the bed, giggling over little things, memories from school, embarrassing moments they'd never told anyone else. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, a backdrop to their laughter. Akosua let out a yawn, stretching her arms over her head. I should probably shower before bed, she said. Amma nodded, watching as Akosua stood and reached for the hem of her gown. It was only when she pulled it over her head that Amma realized. She was staring. Her gaze caught on the smooth curve of Akosua's shoulders, the damp sheen on her skin from the rain they had briefly run through earlier. Akosua, now standing in just the other piece of cotton, caught Amma's eyes on her and paused. A small smirk tugged at the corners of her lips. What? Akosua asked, tilting her head. Amma blinked rapidly, heat rising to her face. Nothing, she mumbled, turning away too quickly. Akosua chuckled softly, stepping closer. The sound light but laced with amusement. Amma, she teased. It's not different from yours. Amma swallowed, suddenly finding herself too aware of everything. The closeness, the way the dim lights from her bedside lamp softened Akosua's features, the scent of rain still clinging to her skin. Akosua reached for the towel on the chair, then hesitated. I don't have anything to sleep in, he reminded her. Amma nodded quickly, turning to her wardrobe with more urgency than necessary. She rummaged through her clothes until she found an extra nightgown, one of her favorites, soft and worn in the best way. Here, she said, handing it over. Akosua took it, but instead of heading straight for the bathroom, she brought it close to her nose, inhaling deeply. Her eyes fluttered shut for just a second before she opened them again, a slow smile forming on her lips. It smells like you, she murmured, her voice quieter now. Like your talcum powder. Amma's breath caught, her fingers curling slightly against the sheets. Something shifted between them then. Something neither of them had words for, but both of them could feel. And that was how their secret had started. It was filled with longing and passion. As the rain continued to fall, Amma and Akosua lay in the quiet of Amma's bedroom. Their bodies now cooled from their showers, their hair still slightly damp. The soft cotton sheets felt cold against their skin as they slipped under the covers, their movements slow, deliberate, as if neither of them wanted to break the fragile stillness that hung between them. Amma reached out and turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save for the faint glow of the streetlights slipping through the curtains. The air was thick with something unsaid, something neither of them had been brave enough to name. They lay on their sides, backs turned to each other, their breath steady but not quite relaxed. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the rain tapping gently against the window. Then, Akosua's voice broke through the stillness. "Amma, the night where you gave me, is it your older one?" Amma blinked into the darkness, her fingers curling slightly against the sheets. "No," she murmured. "I'm wearing the older one. I've had this since I was 20. Akosua let out a small sigh. "Isn't it too tight on you?" she asked, her voice softer now. "A little," Amma admitted, barely above a whisper. The weight of those words settled between them, making the air feel heavier, charged. Amma heard the soft rustle of fabric behind her before she felt the subtle shifts in the mattress. She knew what was happening before she turned. Akosua was taking it off. Amma's breath hitched. She lay still, her back still to Akosua, but every fiber of her body was aware of the space between them, or rather, the lack of it. Then, barely above a breath, Akosua whispered, "Look at me." Amma hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, her fingers gripping the sheets beneath her. But when she finally turned, when her eyes met Akosua's, the tension between them was undeniable. Akosua's gaze was deep, her expression unreadable except for the unmistakable longing that flickered behind her eyes. She wasn't just looking at Amma, she was seeing her, every inch of her, every breath she took, every hesitation, every unspoken thought. "I've wanted this for so long," Akosua murmured. Before Amma could fully process those words, Akosua moved closer, her lips brushing softly, not against her mouth, no, but on a fleshy round some inches below her shoulder. The sensation sent a shiver through Amma's entire body, her breath coming out unsteady. A sigh escaped her lips before she could catch it, and that seemed to be all the invitation Akosua needed. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of their breaths, the shift of fabric, the tension between them thick enough to drown in. Amma didn't know how long they stayed like that, lost in the feeling, in the warmth of each other. She didn't hear the footsteps. She didn't hear the door creak open. She didn't even register the sudden rush of lights until a sharp gasp cut through the air. Amma's mother stood in the doorway, eyes wide, face frozen in shock. The room, once a cocoon of quiet intimacy, now felt exposed, vulnerable, like the very air had been ripped away. Amma's stomach dropped. Akosua stiffened beside her, her bare shoulders catching the light. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the room, an entirely different kind of storm had just begun.